Hello everyone. So I'm David. I have a chronic Twitter addiction, and so as a form of extreme therapy, I thought I would join Twitter and see if I could cure myself, and it hasn't really worked, to be honest. So I've been working for Twitter now for literally just over 2 weeks. So these views are my own, not my employees, it says in all good Twitter bios. But hopefully you'll see some overlap at some point, or else there's something wrong with the interview process. So before I worked for Twitter, I worked for media agencies. So I've done that for kind of all of my career. And it's genuinely a brilliant thing to do. And one of the things that make working for a media agency so good, and I know this sounds sycophantic, is that you get to spend time with ad agencies, and particularly with planners in ad agencies who genuinely are some of the most interesting and insightful people you get to meet. And obviously as a media planner, you get to work with more than one agency at a time in a way that perhaps some clients don't. So I think hopefully I've learned kind of a huge amount from being in and around that environment, as well as kind of messing around with media for a few years as well. So anyway, whatever happened to brand building? I thought I'd start by being more annoying, and actually kind of question, the question behind the question, because that always goes down well. And my assumption is that, really what's behind this question is that we've obviously seen a massive increase in, direct marketing and in, digital marketing and in, short-term sales driving and cost per click and cost per acquisition and what have you. And it can seem that that is to the detriment of the brand. But actually, my take on this is that actually the opposite is true. And I think, for me, certainly, brands are still a thing. And I don't think anybody is kind of saying that they're not. I don't think anybody's kind of saying, well, we'll dismiss the brand and just get on with it. And in fact, I think what's happening more than anything is that brands have never been more important, because there's so much other stuff to play with and to think about. You need a really strong brand to basically, to give you an anchor and to help kind of guide you through this stuff. And I think the reason why brands are important is because ultimately, in terms of what we're doing with our marketing at the moment, is that we are kind of marketing in the age of context. This is a book that you can kind of see in the background. It's kind of it's written by Scoble and Israel. It's worth buying. It's probably worth looking at on Wikipedia first and then deciding. And kind of spoiler alert, but they basically identify kind of 5 key levers of context, because obviously this is the age of context, kind of created by these levers being mobile, social, data, location, and sensors. It's nice to see sensors getting a shout out there amongst all the others. You don't get to see it very often. And of course, this is the stuff that's dominating kind of conversations in media agencies, but in ad agencies, and obviously in boardrooms as well. This is the stuff that genuinely is defining, the kind of marketing era in which we're working with. Now, when working with brands, we kind of tend to discuss the brand to death, and we do pyramids and we do onions and what have you. From my experience, it's been really very useful when working on a brand to basically be able to answer some key questions. It's just kind of a selection of them. What does our brand stand for, very obviously? What does our brand stand against? Because ultimately that's an important thing to know as well. What problem are we solving for people? What role do we play in people's lives? All the stuff that kind of Mark talked about. Who aren't we for? For me, that's really important. So many brands seek to be this great broad church, and obviously some of the strongest brands are the ones who go, we're absolutely not for that, and for those types of people. And then the one at the bottom that I want to talk about a bit more, which Sarah hinted at earlier, is this question about what business are we in. And I don't mean the kind of vertical category that the brand is in, which I would say clients probably spend 95% of their time at least thinking about. So what are we doing in the context of our competitors? But more, what business is the brand in? So what business does the brand play in people's lives? How are we helping people to have a better life? If we went away, would anybody care? So genuinely, what business are we in? And the reason it's so important is because it gives you that anchor to know this is us. But it also gives you that stretch. And I think in an era of context, all of these things going on, you need both things. You need that anchor to say, this isn't changing, this is staying the same, we know what we're about. But there's so much you can stretch into now, all those opportunities for strong brands. That, I think being able to define very clearly what business we're in is a really, really important thing to do. And I always wonder now, you think about the brands you work on yourself, how quickly and easily can you define, can you answer this question? Not only in terms of speed, but how clear is it, and how well known is it within the organization? So I think that's a key question. And there's a few examples here, obviously, which I'll kind of skip over, brands who, for me, really understand the business they're in. So, Paddy Power are often celebrated as a brand because, they're a bookmaker, but they're all into mischief, and they've got someone whose job title is head of mischief, and, they're kind of very well celebrated brand. Something like Snickers, for example, they are obviously a chocolate bar, but they've done, for me, very good work in defining stretching their brand slightly beyond just being, a chocolate sweet, but to be in this area of hunger solving, you're not you when you're hungry, whatever. Shows it doesn't have to be a massive stretch, but for me, that is a strong anchor and an interesting stretch. And then a brand like Specsavers, which I love, oddly, I've kind of defined this myself. They're about celebrating and preventing eyesight fails, which you'll know from the ads, right? Should have gone to Specsavers. And these for me, and I don't work on any of these brands, and I never have, but these for me from the outside are brands who clearly have a strong sense of what business they're in, and it allows them to go to places that their competitors can't and their competitors won't, and it allows them to take advantage of this age of context in which we're living in. So again, we talked about this. So Snickers, hunger solving, a lovely thing with Google AdWords around this thing about you're not you when you're hungry, and if you put a typo into Google, up would come their message, basically advising you to have a Snickers. Now, I know it's been talked about a little bit, this case study, but I love it because Snickers have got no right to be in this environment and to be utilising data in this way. But by understanding that they're stretched, they were able to do that. And you compare that to a brand like Cadbury's, which I have done a bit of work on. Their business is all around everyday joy. You might argue that's perhaps a stretch too far, but they're clear that that's the business they're in, and therefore they're going to be activating around the Brits and doing some stuff around that as well. So taking advantage of context in a different way. You've got a Snickers bar, you've got a Cadbury's Dairy Milk. They are both chocolate. They're in fundamentally different businesses, and I think that they are stronger brands for that. So again, more Paddy Power. God, we could just stand here all night looking at stuff that Paddy Power have done. But again, you ask yourself, could Coral do this thing where they go to Anfield and put a statue of David Moyes up? Could Ladbrokes do it? Could William Hill do it? I mean, they might be able to, but Paddy Power can go there. Could any of those brands have done rainbow laces last week? Almost certainly not. Comes with a very strong sense of knowing what business you're in. And I say Specsavers, the reason I love this so much, they've been saying this for ages, should have gone to Specsavers. This is the media doing their advertising for them. This is literally the front page of the Sunday Times the day after, I think it was Arsenal played Chelsea, and the ref sent the wrong player off. You've literally got the headline writer writing the headline from the perspective of the Specsavers brand, which is amazing. And that for me comes from sheer consistency and knowing what business you're in. Now that is very, very close to short-sightedness. They're opticians, right? There's not a big stretch for them, but they're very, very clear about what they're doing, and they're doing it consistently. So I'm going to share kind of 5 thoughts on how to do brand building in the age of context. The first one, hey, what business are you in? Be very clear on that. I hope you've landed that point. I think you need to be really, really clear on it. And if you're not, it's worth spending time considering that. The second one, though, I think is just as important, is resisting this urge to tinker. Because we like a tinker. We do annual planning, and we kind of feel sometimes we have to justify little tweaks to the brand, and we don't stand for this anymore. We need all the best brands. Mark said he was a custodian of a 145-year-old brand, and there's not a lot of tinkering going on with a brand like that. I forget the name of the thing at the bottom, the swooshy thing, but that's about as much as it gets. So it's tempting, ridiculously tempting to tinker. Don't tinker with a brand, tinker with the context. So understand what your brand's about, and don't touch it. My view on this, and I'm going to try a slightly laboured cricketing metaphor because obviously it's the right audience for this. I think we're building brands in the way that kind of 2020 cricket teams build innings, right? So it's all about kind of noise and slog hitting and colour and music as you come out, and you're quite vibrant and trying to catch people's attention. But it's all over relatively quickly, and nobody can quite remember who won. And yet, what I think we should be doing is building brands in the style of Jeff Boycott, right? Now, Jeff Boycott was a cricketer in the 60s who would bat for like 3 days for 24 runs or something and just refused to get out. Right? He was just obstinate and he was stubborn and he just not playing any rubbish. He just refused to get out. But he was the foundation upon which the rest of the innings could be built. And I think that's, for me, is the kind of what we need from a brand. We need our brand to be that kind of Jeffrey Boycott type figure, a foundation for the innings. And obviously what can happen later on in the innings is that your big hitters kind of come in further down once that's established and can kind of take advantage of some of the tired bowlers in our metaphor, or in the real world context, all these opportunities that are around mobile, social data, location, sensors, etc., etc. If you know what you stand for, you can do all that. So stop tinkering, less of a hurry. I think this is quite important for a brand to say or do something relevant. I know that sounds obvious. If you can't say or do something relevant, and ideally, obviously, do, at least say or do something memorable. And a lot of advertising doesn't necessarily do that either, and a lot of brand communication doesn't. I really like this. So this is something that I used to work with a guy called John Wilshire, PhD, and he spotted something once that Emily Bell had said in The Guardian about technologists. It's going back a few years now, but she was talking about what technologists do all day. In some piece. And you can see from the quote here, what they're motivated by is providing usefulness, entertainment, education, and connectivity to people. So, you've got there, entertain, educate, useful, connect. These are good principles for brands, especially in the era of kind of shared communications. These are all, I think, genuinely, and this is part of what attracted me to go and work for Twitter, because I think when Twitter's at its best, this is what it does. It's that kind of app thinking, and obviously it's the users on the platform who are doing that as well. And I think when brands are at their best, this is what they're doing as well. It might be that some brands are better on entertain, and some brands are better on being useful or whatever. And it might even be that perhaps too many brands are seeking to do entertain, and certainly in terms of big advertising, and perhaps not enough for doing some of the other stuff, some of the stuff that Alex talked about. But for me, these are really useful principles to kind of build your brand by. Know what you stand for, and then seek to do this. And I mentioned this. This is we made an ad break out of Lego for Warner Brothers for launch of the Lego movie. And I mentioned this to just make the point: it doesn't have to be perfect. Because these are the 4 ads that ran. There were ads for BHF, BT, Confused, and Premier Inn. They all just recreated their ads in Lego. And you can see this is Lenny Henry down here. And now that is not a very good Lenny Henry in Lego, right? But it didn't matter because perfection was not necessarily required in order to kind of lean into that context. In this case, obviously being the Lego movie, and the people who saw the ads preferred them to the original. Brand likability was up, I think, 19% on average for the Lego remakes of these kind of perfectly made ads. And for me, I think we don't need perfection in brand building at all. People can forgive imperfection, so long as you're being entertaining, useful, connecting, etc., etc. And it comes from the brand. I mentioned this as well. Embrace context. There's a reminder. Buy the book. The 5 levers. These are all really useful levers of context to be thinking about in terms of our everyday communication. And then I guess my final point is just around ensuring the brand gets credit. And this is just a bugbear of mine, so apologies if this turns into a rant at the end. But I remember mid-2000s, I was working on Nike at Mindshare, and we had a few other brands as well, obviously. And everyone was obsessed with doing AFPs, right? Advertiser-funded programs on the telly. At the time, the Ofcom regulations are very, very strict. You can't mention the brand in the show. You can't put the brand's name in the title. You can't have people wearing Nike trainers in the show, even though it's a Nike show, unless it's incidental. So how you define that, I don't know. But essentially, we knew that Nike had done this fantastic piece of advertiser-funded content, but I doubt that anybody watching did. And they may have been entertained by it, I don't know, but you just have to make sure that the brand gets credit for what you do. And I know it sounds obvious, but it kills me when I see ads 60 seconds long, 58 seconds of something, guess the ad, guess the brand, 2 seconds at the end, the brand flushes up. I think you have to be less subtle and more blatant and make sure that the brand gets credit for what it does. The Red Bull Space Leap thing from space is called the Red Bull Spaceball thing from space, right? It's not called that, but everyone knows that Red Bull did it. It was hugely entertaining, and it was no less bad for being clearly very branded. So I think just make sure, collectively we need to make sure that the brand gets credit, because as I say, I've seen that kind of time and time again. And on that rant, I conclude. Follow this lot. Thank you.